Look, I don't believe in the Bible because it's been changed and mistranslated many times. Okay, real quick, you do know that we have manuscripts that are 1,000 years older than King James that line up with our Bibles today.
All right, let's see it.
It's called Codex Sinaiticus. It's the same of what we have.
No, it's not, and this claim can only come from someone who has never actually looked into the contents of Codex Sinaiticus, which differ vastly from the King James Version, which itself differs vastly from what we have today, if by that you refer to a version of the New Testament that the majority of scholars agrees is the closest we can come to the original New Testament. Because in addition to having the Apocrypha scattered about the Old Testament, it also has two non-canonical New Testament books, the Shepherd of Hermas and the Epistle of Barnabas. It's also missing an awful lot of stuff that we find in the King James Version. So when we go back and look at Codex Sinaiticus, the Gospel of Mark ends at chapter 16, verse 8. Verses 9 through 20 are just not there. We do not have the story of the woman taken in adultery, which occurs in the King James Version at the end of John chapter 7 and the beginning of John chapter 8. There are over a dozen other entire verses that are just absent from Codex Sinaiticus, and there are many verses that are very different, and even some verses that are added into Codex Sinaiticus. And so there are a lot of differences between Codex Sinaiticus and the King James Version. And many of those differences crept in over the centuries as the text was copied and transmitted and translated. And since the King James Version, we have discovered older and more reliable manuscripts, and we have become more careful about the text-critical enterprise, and we have reconstructed a version of the New Testament that we now think is much closer than anything that has come before. And that is a very different text from the King James Version. Now, inevitably, the goalposts are going to be moved to the claim that, well, none of the differences affect doctrine. And there are two problems with that. The first is that it's simply not true. It affects the doctrine of inerrancy. And while folks will say, well, inerrancy only applies to the original autographs, what all this demonstrates is we cannot say for sure what the relationship is between the texts as we have them today and the original autographs. It's always just us hoping and guessing. And so inerrancy does not apply to any version of the Bible that exists. But the other problem is that's a meaningless assertion because doctrine is not a function of the text. Doctrine arises from a process of negotiation between a group's social and historical circumstances and their needs and exigencies and goals for the future and the text. And so the text can remain constant and the doctrine can and does change. Meanwhile, the text can change and the doctrine can remain constant. So the doctrine does not flow downstream unadulterated from the text. The doctrine is generated primarily based on the needs and exigencies and goals of the given group. The text is just the authority to which that group appeals to authorize its doctrines.
Pardon me? Yeah, so literally like a simple Google search will show you that the Bible hasn't been changed. Even AI agrees.
If you're just asking AI and doing a simple Google search, then you don't even begin to know what you're talking about and very clearly cannot engage directly with the data. Because we can go look at the Dead Sea Scrolls too, and we have multiple different manuscripts of a number of books from the Hebrew Bible, and they differ from one manuscript to the other. And there are differences between the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Masoretic text in virtually every single passage that is preserved within the scrolls. So there are a lot of differences.
But TikTok told me it was rewritten, and my atheist friend, how can this be? So since you learned this, how about giving the Bible a shot? I'll consider reading.
Maybe consider thinking critically about what you're reading.
Guys, don't buy this misinformation that people try to tell you about the Bible being changed. It's just not true.
You have no idea if it's true or not.
The Bible is now as it was written. Comment, God's word is eternal.
Nah, I'm good. And the fit for this video has been the original Hulk.